Welcome back to my channel, where real story takes its time. Let's get into it.
My name's Miles. I'm 31, and for most of my life, I thought keeping the peace was more important than standing up for myself. That belief worked fine, until the day my brother's wife looked me straight in the eye, smirked, and said, "You're just bitter because you'll never be as successful as us," while accepting a vacation I'd paid for. Everyone laughed. Everyone except me. I didn't say much, just smiled and replied, "We'll see." That moment, quiet as it was, ended up changing everything. To understand why that sentence hit as hard as it did, you have to know my family. My brother, Aaron, is 2 years older than me and was always the golden one in my parents' eyes. Driven, ambitious, charming in that practiced way people in sales learn to be. He could sell you your own shoes and make you thank him for it. Growing up, Aaron was praised for every small thing he did, while I was the responsible one, code for the person who quietly made sure things didn't fall apart. I was the one who remembered mom's medication refills, who helped dad with the mortgage paperwork when he forgot, who picked up Aaron from parties when he got too drunk to drive. None of that ever made it into family conversations. To them, I was dependable, but forgettable. Aaron met his wife, Jenna, about 5 years ago. She's the kind of person who introduces herself by mentioning her Instagram following before her actual job. Everything about her screamed status. Designer purses, filtered smiles, and constant comparisons. From day one, she made it clear she thought I was beneath them. I worked in IT, freelance mostly, and while I made decent money, it didn't look flashy. Aaron and Jenna, on the other hand, loved appearances. They'd started a small marketing firm and posted constantly about their entrepreneurial lifestyle. What they didn't post was that I was the one who built their company's website, handled all their cybersecurity, and helped them recover from a near-disastrous data breach for free. I used to tell myself I didn't mind helping. They were family, after all. But somewhere along the line, that goodwill turned into expectation. Every time Aaron's laptop froze, I got a call. Every time Jenna couldn't remember her password, I got a message. They never offered payment, never even a thank you, just the assumption that I'd always be there. Last summer, they hit a rough patch financially. The irony of running a marketing firm while being terrible at money management wasn't lost on me. They'd rented an expensive office space downtown, leased 2 new cars, and planned a brand-building vacation in Italy, all while struggling to cover payroll. That's when Aaron called, voice dripping with fake humility, and said, "Hey, little bro, any chance you could help us out for a month or two, just until our next client payment comes in?" I hesitated. My gut told me it wasn't smart, but my parents got involved before I could even answer. "Miles," Mom said, "you've always been good with money. You can help your brother. Family helps each other." Dad chimed in, "It's just a loan, son. You know Aaron will pay you back." Against my better judgment, I agreed. I wired them a substantial sum, enough to cover their short-term costs, under the condition that they'd repay me within 3 months. Aaron promised it wouldn't take that long. He even joked, "You'll get your money back before Jenna finishes packing for Italy." 3 months came and went. No repayment. When I brought it up, Aaron brushed it off. "We're still waiting on a client payment. You know how business is," he said, waving his hand like it was nothing. Jenna rolled her eyes and added, "You're so uptight about money, Miles. It's not like we're not going to pay you." That's when I started noticing something else. Whenever I'd visit my parents, they'd talk about Aaron and Jenna's business as though it was some massive success story. "They're doing so well," Mom would gush. "They're even taking us all on a family trip next month. Isn't that generous?" I felt my stomach turn. The family trip was the one I'd quietly paid for when Aaron said they couldn't afford it but wanted to celebrate as a family. I'd covered the deposit under the assumption they'd reimburse me when business picked up. That never happened, and now they were taking credit for it, bragging about their generosity. The moment that changed everything happened 2 weeks before that trip. We were at dinner, my parents, Aaron, Jenna, and me. Jenna had just finished talking about how exhausting it was managing multiple income streams when Mom brought up the vacation again. "Miles, aren't you excited?" Jenna and Aaron really went all out for us. I looked at Jenna, who smirked over her wine glass and said, "We figured you could use a break, Miles. You know, from your routine." She said routine like it was something pitiful. Aaron chuckled, adding, "Yeah, man, you deserve to get out of that apartment and live a little." That's when I realized they hadn't just used me. They were laughing about it. I wanted to call them out right there, tell my parents the truth, but I didn't. I just stared at Jenna as she leaned over and whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear, "You're just bitter because you'll never be as successful as us." Everyone laughed, even my parents. Something in me clicked. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just smiled and said, "We'll see." They thought I was backing down. What I was really doing was taking mental notes. After dinner, I went home and opened my laptop. I started going through every piece of work I'd ever done for their company. Every email, every line of code, every unpaid invoice. I'd built their website from scratch, maintained their servers, even set up their client portals. All without official contracts because, again, they were family. My name wasn't on the paperwork, but my fingerprints were everywhere. I started realizing how vulnerable their setup actually was. Aaron and Jenna had been sloppy with their business records. They'd mixed personal and company finances, ignored compliance regulations, and used software licenses tied to my personal accounts. I hadn't noticed before because I wasn't looking for it. But now, every oversight stood out like a neon sign. That night, I barely slept. Not out of anger, but because my mind was racing. I wasn't planning revenge, not yet. I just wanted to understand how deep this went. And the deeper I looked, the more I saw how much control I unknowingly had over their company's operations. The next week, Aaron called again, this time asking if I could help fix a little tech issue. Apparently, one of their major clients couldn't access a deliverable. Jenna chimed in from the background, her tone sharp. "Can you please just handle it? We have a meeting in an hour." I logged in remotely, fixed their mistake, and watched as their smug faces appeared on the conference call screen. They didn't even say thank you. When I reminded Aaron about the money he owed me, he sighed dramatically and said, "You really need to let this go, Miles. It's not a good look." That was the moment the switch flipped. From then on, I started documenting everything. Every message, every call, every favor I'd done. I kept it quiet, polite, even helpful. But underneath that calm, I was preparing. I didn't tell anyone, not even my parents. They were too far gone in their belief that Aaron and Jenna were flawless. When I mentioned my frustrations to Mom one evening, she simply said, "Miles, they're family. You can't expect them to be perfect." But I wasn't expecting perfection. I was expecting decency. As the trip approached, Aaron and Jenna started posting countdowns online, thanking our hard work and perseverance for making it possible. I'd scroll past their posts, a mixture of disbelief and clarity settling in. They had no idea I was watching everything unravel quietly in the background. 2 weeks later, we were supposed to meet to finalize some family plans. I showed up, calm as ever, while Aaron and Jenna laughed about new business ventures. At one point, Jenna said something that stuck with me. "You know, Miles, you're a nice guy, but not everyone's meant to lead. Some people are just better as background players." I smiled again. "Maybe," I said, "but sometimes the background changes the whole picture." Aaron laughed, not realizing that within days, that picture would look very different. After that dinner, something in me changed. I stopped trying to justify their behavior to myself. I stopped telling myself, that's just how they are. Instead, I began watching them, not out of bitterness, but clarity. The more I observed, the more I realized just how deep the manipulation ran. My parents had always treated Aaron like a star they needed to keep shining, and I was the dependable satellite that orbited around him, expected to be grateful for the scraps of warmth he occasionally threw my way. The weeks leading up to the family trip were a blur of tension disguised as small talk. Aaron called me constantly, but not to repay what he owed. He'd call asking for just a quick favor. It started with minor tech requests, then turned into bigger things. Handling their client databases, editing marketing materials, even designing a new campaign because our designer flaked, and you're just better at this stuff anyway. Each time, I reminded him I had my own clients, deadlines, and an actual life. Each time, He brushed it off with that same patronizing tone he'd perfected. Come on, bro, don't be so rigid. You're good at this, and family helps family. I'd heard that phrase too many times. Family helps family. It was a convenient shield they used whenever they wanted something. But it never worked the other way around. One Friday evening, Mom invited us all for dinner. She said it was just a family catch-up, but I knew better. These dinners usually turned into sessions where Aaron and Jenna got praised while I was quietly reminded of how lucky I was to have such a successful brother. Sure enough, as soon as we sat down, Mom beamed at Aaron and said, "Your father and I were just saying how proud we are. You two have worked so hard. We saw the photos you posted from that client meeting. The office looks so professional." Jenna smiled like she was posing for another picture. "Oh, that was such a fun day," she said sweetly. "Miles helped with the tech setup, of course. He's such a lifesaver sometimes." "Sometimes," I muttered before I could stop myself. Jenna laughed, a rehearsed, airy sound. "Oh, don't take it personally. You're just better behind the scenes, you know? You're the type of person who makes things work without needing the spotlight." Dad nodded approvingly, like she'd just said something wise. "And that's a valuable trait, son. Not everyone's built to lead." I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my composure. "Right. Not everyone wants to lead." Aaron smirked. Sure. Whatever helps you sleep at night, man." The conversation moved on, but something in the air shifted. Every comment after that felt sharper, like a dozen small cuts that didn't bleed right away, but stung later. They joked about people who live small lives, made little digs about my apartment being cozy, and compared my quiet routine to their fast-paced lifestyle. Mom, as usual, played mediator, pretending not to notice the tone. "Now, Miles," she said at one point, "you should really take notes from your brother. He's learned how to take risks. You've always played it safe." I looked at her, really looked at her, and asked, "And how did those risks get funded again?" The table went silent for half a second before Aaron broke it with a laugh. "You mean the loan? Relax, man, you'll get it back. Don't make it sound dramatic." "It's been almost a year," I said quietly. Dad frowned. "Miles, your brother's working on it. You don't need to keep score like that. You know money causes tension in families." "Money doesn't cause tension," I replied. "People who don't repay money do." That was the first time I saw Aaron's fake smile falter. Jenna shifted uncomfortably but quickly recovered, flashing that perfect grin again. "You're so serious, Miles. Maybe that's why you're always so stressed. You should learn to trust people more." "Right?" I said, pushing my chair back. "Because trusting you has gone so well." I left early that night. On the way home, Mom texted me a long paragraph about how I needed to stop being sensitive and not ruin the trip with negativity. I didn't respond. Instead, I stared at the message for a long time, realizing how deeply the family hierarchy was embedded. Aaron could do no wrong. I could do no right. Over the next few days, Aaron ramped things up. He started using my professional reputation to benefit himself. One morning, I got an email from a potential client saying they were referred by Aaron's marketing firm. That was odd. I never collaborated with them publicly. When I looked closer, I realized Aaron had been presenting me as part of his company to boost his credibility. He'd even used my portfolio work in his presentations, labeling it under their business name. When I called him about it, he acted like I was overreacting. "Dude, relax. You're getting exposure. We're family. It's not like I'm stealing anything." "Exposure doesn't pay bills," I said. "And using my work without permission isn't exposure, it's lying." He sighed dramatically. "You really need to stop taking everything so personally. We're building something bigger here. You should be proud your work is helping the family business grow." I hung up on him. That night, Dad called. "I heard you and Aaron had a disagreement," he began, his tone that same calm, condescending one he always used when I was younger. "You need to learn to be more cooperative. Aaron's doing great things, and you could benefit from aligning with him instead of fighting him." I almost laughed. "Aligning with him? You mean letting him take credit for my work and call it family teamwork?" Dad sighed. "Miles, you've always been so defensive. No one's out to get you. Your brother loves you." That was the thing. I didn't think Aaron hated me. I just think he loved himself more than he ever could love anyone else. A week later, I stopped by my parents' house to drop off some paperwork Mom needed help with. When I got there, Aaron and Jenna were already there, sitting comfortably on the couch, flipping through a binder. I froze when I realized what it was: my proposal drafts for a government IT contract I'd been working toward for months. "Where did you get that?" I asked, my voice low. Aaron looked up casually. "Oh, Mom said it was on your desk, and since you're so busy, I figured I'd take a look. We've been thinking about going after similar contracts." My chest tightened. "That's not for you to take." Jenna rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on, Miles. You act like you're the only one allowed to have ideas. Don't be territorial." "I'm not being territorial," I said, my hands shaking slightly. "That's my work. You had no right." Aaron's smile vanished. "You really need to get over yourself. Everything you do is so dramatic. You should be happy your family's even interested in collaborating with you." "Collaborating?" I repeated, incredulous. "You mean stealing?" Mom stepped in, holding up her hands like she was calming a child. "Miles, enough. Don't make a scene. Aaron's just inspired by your dedication. You should take it as a compliment." That word, compliment, made my stomach turn. I left without another word, my mind racing the whole way home. My parents had reached a point where they didn't just excuse Aaron's behavior, they rationalized it. And Aaron knew it. He'd weaponized their favoritism perfectly, turning every situation into one where I looked unreasonable if I stood up for myself. That night, I went through my folders, backing up everything important, locking files, securing passwords. I knew then that I couldn't trust any of them. 2 days later, Aaron called again, acting like nothing had happened. "Hey, man, small favor. Could you update the firewall on our company's server? We've been getting weird login attempts." I paused. "Who has access to the admin account?" "You do," he said, laughing lightly. "That's why we need your magic touch. Just fix it, okay? We're swamped." I logged in, and what I saw confirmed what I'd feared. Their company accounts weren't just messy, they were reckless. Shared passwords, unsecured client data, missing invoices, and files labeled incorrectly. It was chaos. And my credentials, the ones tied to my software licenses, were still linked. I could have shut it all down in minutes if I wanted to. But I didn't. Not yet. That was the night I started drafting my plan. Not revenge, exactly, but accountability. For once in my life, I wanted them to see what it felt like to lose control of something they took for granted. Still, before I did anything, I needed to be sure. I spent the next few weeks watching, collecting evidence, saving screenshots, emails, and proof of every unpaid invoice. I even noticed that some client payments had been rerouted through a secondary account that wasn't listed in their business records. It looked suspicious, too suspicious to ignore. Meanwhile, my parents kept insisting I join them for family dinners, as if nothing was wrong. Each one felt like a performance. Jenna would make little comments about people who don't understand real ambition, while Aaron bragged about his business connections. My parents nodded, smiled, and drank it all in. At one point, Mom said something that cemented everything for me. "Miles, you should really thank your brother for including you in so much of his success. He told us you wouldn't even have half your clients if it weren't for his referrals." I felt my face go cold. "He said that?" "Yes," Mom said proudly. "He's always trying to lift you up, even when you two butt heads." That was the final push I needed. They had rewritten the story entirely, turned me from the one holding them up into the one being carried. I realized then that the best revenge wasn't anger, it was precision. And when I told Aaron, "We'll see," that night at dinner, I meant it. He just didn't know how soon he'd find out what I meant. After weeks of careful observation, I realized that waiting for them to trip up wasn't enough. I needed a catalyst, a moment that would show them, without a doubt, that I wasn't someone they could manipulate or ignore. I was always the silent observer, the invisible support, the family tool. But that night, I decided it was time to push past observation and step into action. It started innocuously enough. Aaron called, that familiar drawl in his voice, asking me to review an urgent proposal for a new client. "Hey, Miles," he said casually, as if we'd shared coffee just yesterday. "Can you take a look at the Harper file? Jen is swamped and could really use your expertise." "Shouldn't take long." I let him ramble while I opened the file on my laptop. As I skimmed through it, my heart sank. They'd once again made modifications without consulting me, messing with numbers I had meticulously calculated for months. And worse, they had listed my past work as theirs in the cover sheet. They were essentially presenting my intellectual labor as their own. I replied slowly, deliberately. Aaron, this isn't just a quick fix. You can't just insert your name over my work and call it a proposal. You know that. He chuckled, that familiar laugh that somehow disguised arrogance as charm. Come on, Miles. Don't be dramatic. This is business, not school. Just make it look good. It's what we've always done. That we've always done line hit me like a punch. My blood ran cold, but I didn't show it. Instead, I shut my laptop, stood up, and said, you know what? No, I'm done. Aaron froze. Done? What do you mean? I mean, I won't be your unpaid consultant anymore. I won't bail you out every time you mismanage funds, mislead clients, or take credit for my work. I let the words hang in the air, letting them resonate with the weight they deserved. You've used me for years, and now you're trying to rewrite history. Aaron laughed nervously, clearly thinking I was bluffing. Miles, don't be ridiculous. You're family. Family sticks together. I smiled. Not warmly, not gently, but with a cold, hard edge. Family doesn't steal from family. And yes, I've got a history of keeping the peace. But I'm not that person anymore. That night, I made the first move. I transferred all of the intellectual property I had contributed to their business into a secure account under my control. Every line of code, every marketing asset, every client contact list, they were mine now. I didn't delete anything. I just made it untouchable without my permission. The betrayal was silent but complete. I knew Aaron and Jenna would panic the second they tried to access their files, but I didn't want to be hasty. I wanted to savor the moment, to let the tension build until it was unbearable. 3 days later, I got my first taste of the fallout. Aaron called me at noon, his voice uncharacteristically sharp. Miles, what did you do? I did what I should have done years ago, I replied calmly. I secured what's rightfully mine. You've had access to my work for long enough without proper acknowledgement or payment. That ends now. He sputtered, fumbling over words. You can't do this. You know how much clients rely on these materials. You can't just take it away. I can. And I did. That's exactly what I did. Jenna got on the line, her voice shrill. Miles, this isn't fair. You're jeopardizing everything we've built. Not everything, I said. Just what you were never entitled to. The rest is yours, minus my labor. That was the first moment I saw real panic in them. Aaron's voice shook, something I'd never heard before. You're being petty. This is ridiculous. You're ruining us. I let him stew. I didn't respond further. Instead, I started documenting every call, every protest, every angry text they sent. For the first time in years, I felt empowered, not vengeful, not malicious, just in control. The real betrayal, though, didn't hit with Aaron or Jenna. It hit with my parents. That same evening, Mom called, her voice tight with anxiety. Miles, honey, I don't understand. Aaron says you locked all the files, that you're trying to destroy the family business. I didn't destroy anything, I said. I simply removed unauthorized access. Every line of work I've created belongs to me until it's properly acknowledged and paid for. Mom gasped. Miles, this isn't how families behave. You're supposed to be helping, supporting. We thought you were the dependable one. I couldn't stop the anger I felt from boiling over. Dependable doesn't mean a doormat, Mom. I'm done being the family scapegoat while you all cheer on people who use me for personal gain. The silence that followed was deafening. I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind as she tried to rationalize it. Dad chimed in, his tone measured, but I could hear the judgment underlining every word. Miles, this is extreme. Family doesn't act like this. You're being heartless. I paused before replying. Heartless? I think using me for years without acknowledgement, then mocking me at family gatherings, qualifies as a lot worse. I'm finally being accountable, something I wish the rest of you were. I hung up before they could respond. That night, I barely slept, but for the first time, it was peaceful. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel nervous. I felt liberated. The next morning, my phone exploded. 46 missed calls. Emails from mom, dad, Aaron, and even Jenna. Texts flooded in. Why would you do this? We're ruined. You're destroying everything. How could you betray us like this? I ignored them all. I let it build. I knew their desperation would only intensify. By mid-afternoon, Aaron's panic escalated into threats. If you don't restore access, Miles will. I laughed quietly, shaking my head. You'll what? Sue me? Try to get revenge? That's rich, considering how much you've stolen from me over the years. Jenna's voice joined the call, trembling. Miles, please, this isn't necessary. You're crossing a line. No, Jenna, I said, calm as a lake before a storm. You crossed a line years ago. I'm simply responding in kind. Throughout the day, my parents called and texted repeatedly, trying to guilt me, pleading, even cajoling. Family sticks together, Mom wrote. You're heartless, Dad texted. Aaron's messages veered into full-blown panic. Miles, you have no idea what this will do to us. But I stayed silent. I didn't reply to a single one. I didn't argue. I didn't justify. I let them stew in the consequences of their own actions. By evening, I realized something that made my chest tighten, not in fear, but in affirmation. The family that had always treated me as a secondary character, the people who had used me, mocked me, and manipulated me into submission, were now completely dependent on me. I had never felt such control over the narrative of my own life. Aaron called again, voice cracking with frustration and disbelief. Miles, you can't do this. You're making us look like fools. I didn't respond. I was upstairs in my apartment, making a pot of tea, listening to the chaos unfold through texts and missed calls. It was like watching a storm from a safe distance. The energy was wild, untamed, and yet I was untouchable. It was the first time in years that I realized how completely I had been underestimated. Not just by Aaron and Jenna, but by my parents too. They had all assumed I'd continue to serve their interests silently, without question. And now, I finally understood the power of refusing to be invisible. That night, as I scrolled through the mounting messages, I knew this was just the beginning. They had no idea how far I could go. I had made them panic, but I hadn't even begun to leverage everything I had quietly built, documented, and secured over the years. For the first time, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Anticipation. Not fear. Not anger. Anticipation. Because I knew the family that had once controlled me, mocked me, and ignored me was about to experience the same helplessness they had forced me to feel. And this time, I wouldn't hold back. After that first day of chaos, I thought the storm would die down, but it didn't. If anything, it got worse. For the first time in years, my family was openly hostile toward me. And unlike the quiet digs or condescending smiles I was used to, this was raw, unfiltered panic. Aaron's texts kept coming, each one more desperate than the last. Miles, you're ruining us. I'll fix it. Just give me access back. You don't understand the consequences. Meanwhile, Jenna's messages veered from pleading to condescending, trying to guilt me while acting like I was overreacting. My parents, true to form, alternated between panic and passive-aggressive scolding. Miles, family sticks together. You're being cruel. How could you do this to your own brother? At first, I felt a twinge of guilt. Not because I had done anything wrong. Nothing I did was unjustified, but because it was so surreal to see my own family treat me like this. The emotional weight hit hard. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat properly. Every time my phone buzzed, I braced for the next wave of blame. For a week, I was a mess. I kept looking at the files I'd locked, the proposals I'd secured, my proof of every unpaid favor, every overlooked effort. And for the first time in years, I realized just how alone I really was. That loneliness was a sharp, painful feeling, one I hadn't fully acknowledged before. My parents had always been there, in their way, but now I could see the truth. Their loyalty was only ever performative, conditional. Aaron's success was a facade propped up on my work, and Jenna's admiration of herself came at my expense. I felt like I had reached the bottom, not financially, not professionally, but emotionally. I'd been betrayed by the people who were supposed to support me unconditionally. I spent that first week in a blur of anxiety, exhaustion, and reflection. I considered giving in, unlocking the files, letting them off the hook. The rational voice in my head whispered, "It's your family. Just make peace. Don't escalate." But each text, each call, each gaslighting attempt only hardened my resolve. I realized that giving in now would be worse than the emotional exhaustion. It would be surrender, proof that years of being taken advantage of were justified, proof that I was the subordinate, forever invisible. So I withdrew. I stopped answering calls and texts. I didn't check my emails for days. I went for long walks in the early morning, just me and my thoughts, letting the cool air calm my nerves. I reconnected with small routines I had abandoned. Reading, journaling, making coffee exactly the way I liked it, cooking meals that weren't just functional but enjoyable. Slowly, painfully, I started rebuilding myself. At first, it was just survival, holding on to my sense of self amidst the chaos. But then, something shifted. I realized that being the silent observer, the dependable one who never demanded recognition, had its advantages. I had knowledge, resources, and leverage that Aaron and Jenna would never suspect I could wield. They assumed I was powerless because I rarely asserted myself. That assumption was about to be my greatest strength. I began documenting everything meticulously. Every unpaid invoice, every moment my work had been co-opted, every text, email, and call. I made copies of proposals I had submitted for other clients, contracts I had drafted, even the back-end coding of their website. I knew I had built their entire infrastructure without formal recognition. Now, I had proof, in black and white, that the success they flaunted wasn't theirs alone. But I didn't act immediately. Instead, I focused on myself, my own growth. I invested time in my freelance clients, optimizing workflows, networking, and quietly taking on new projects. I discovered that working independently, without the constant stress of family drama, allowed me to actually thrive. Income increased, confidence returned, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel tethered to anyone else's expectations. It was during this period of quiet rebuilding that I realized I had more power than I ever imagined. Aaron and Jenna were reckless, sloppy, and dependent on systems I controlled. They were overextended financially, relying on client accounts, software licenses, and proposals that were tied directly to me. If I wanted, I could paralyze their business in an instant. But instead of acting impulsively, I waited. I let them flounder while I gained momentum. My parents, oblivious as ever, continued their pattern of blind support for Aaron. When they invited me over for dinner, I declined politely. "I'm busy with work," I'd say. "Maybe another time." Each refusal was a small act of autonomy, a reclamation of control. They didn't push too hard at first, but over time, the disapproval in their messages grew. "Miles, you need to make more time for your family," Mom texted. "Aaron and Jenna are worried you're drifting away," Dad added. It amused me. They assumed I was still emotionally bound, that I would bend under the weight of guilt or obligation. They underestimated how much clarity and self-respect I had gained during the week I had spent in isolation, rebuilding my life. I also began laying the groundwork for a quiet form of revenge. I didn't want confrontation. I wanted inevitability. I started drafting contracts for intellectual property, formalizing every freelance relationship, and creating secure backups. Every time Aaron or Jenna asked for help, even a small favor, I delayed politely, citing client deadlines or technical conflicts. I didn't refuse outright. I simply began to establish boundaries they couldn't ignore. Meanwhile, my life improved in ways I hadn't expected. Freed from constant emotional manipulation, I slept better, worked better, and felt more grounded. I started exercising consistently, eating better, and even took short weekend trips to recharge. I was reclaiming not just my professional credibility, but my personal sense of worth. The more I invested in myself, the less the chaos at home affected me. Despite all this, the sting of betrayal lingered. Every time I saw a post from Aaron or Jenna flaunting a business trip or client success, I felt the old familiar ache of being overlooked. But I no longer let it control me. I documented it, noted patterns, and prepared. If they wanted to flaunt success built on my work, I would let them, until the moment when their carefully constructed facade became irrelevant. By the end of the month, I had built something stronger than resentment, a plan. Not one fueled by rage, but by precision and strategy. I would not react impulsively. I would not escalate without reason. Instead, I would allow their overconfidence, their entitlement, and their recklessness to become the very tools of their undoing. Every unpaid invoice, every stolen idea, every dismissive comment, they were all assets in my quiet ledger of accountability. And in the process, I discovered something remarkable. Independence is power. The very thing my family had mocked me for, the quiet, dependable, behind-the-scenes diligence, was the foundation of control. Aaron and Jenna had assumed that because I had always been nice, I would never act decisively. They had no idea how much they had underestimated me. One night, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, reviewing the secure backups and the documents I had compiled. My phone sat quietly in the corner, the unread messages from Aaron, Jenna, and my parents blinking like distant thunder. I smiled, not with malice, but with calm certainty. I had reached rock bottom, emotionally exhausted, isolated, and unrecognized, but I had also risen. I was stronger, more self-reliant, and fully aware of the leverage I now held. The realization hit me like a wave. I didn't need their acknowledgement. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their money or their praise. All I needed was patience and precision. The tools, the knowledge, the leverage, they were mine and mine alone. And that's when I made the decision. I wouldn't just walk away from my family. I would rise above them, quietly, deliberately, ensuring that when the moment came, they would finally understand what it meant to take someone like me for granted. I didn't know exactly when the moment would come, but I knew it would. After a few weeks of watching them flail and savoring the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you're not the only one who can hold the map, I realized I needed more than leverage. I needed legitimacy. Locking the files and documenting everything had rattled them, but if I wanted the outcome to be permanent, I couldn't rely on panic alone. I needed a position that would make the rest of the world recognize what I already knew. The success Aaron and Jenna plastered across Instagram was propped up by other people's work and a surprising amount of bad bookkeeping. So I set out to make my quiet authority official. The first break came unexpectedly. A government contractor I'd previously pitched to, someone I'd helped once with a minor security audit years ago, reached out after seeing a thread where I'd explained data privacy best practices. The message was polite and short. "Are you available for a consult on a major bid?" It was the exact kind of work I'd been aiming for, legitimate, well-funded, and importantly, public-facing in a way Aaron's little firm never was. I accepted the call. On the phone, their project manager spoke with the calm efficiency of someone who deals in clear contracts and clean deliverables. "We need an independent verification of all back-end code and intellectual property ownership tied to subcontractors," she said. "We've uncovered some messy attributions in the docs, and we need a trusted third party." I didn't need to pretend surprise. I had stacks of screenshots, email chains, and version histories that showed where their code originated and who'd actually written which modules. I offered them a tighter timeline than they'd hoped for and a price that reflected the value and the risk. They hired me within 24 hours. That contract did more than pad my bank account. It put my name on a proposal submitted to a government agency and gave me access, legally, professionally, to audit other contractors' relationships. When I dove into the documentation they provided, something odd emerged. Aaron and Jenna's company was listed on a bid that included intellectual property clearly traced back to my archives. Worse, there were inconsistencies in the filing. Software licenses registered under personal emails, client invoices routed through personal accounts, and tax filings that didn't match the cash flow their public statements insinuated. In short, they'd mixed personal and corporate finances in the most careless way a small business could possibly do. Armed with that information and my new official role, I began to structure my moves more like a professional than a spurned family member. For the first time in this whole mess, I hired someone, an independent attorney who specialized in intellectual property and small business disputes. I wasn't trying to litigate out of spite. I wanted a clean, enforceable path to recovery and recognition. The lawyer asked the right questions, looked at my documentation, and said something I'd never heard my parents say. "This is clear. You have standing." Hearing that line from a lawyer who wasn't a friend or an ex-colleague felt like provenance from my own experience. It validated the countless hours I'd poured into other people's facades. While the attorney drafted a formal demand for acknowledgement and compensation, I also accepted a subcontractor position with a competitor of Aaron's firm. It was a quiet move. No press, no social media posts. Just a professional agreement stating I would provide certain services directly to that competitor. It accomplished two things. It lined up alternative revenue, so I didn't need to rely on any repayment, and it made it more difficult for Aaron to claim he couldn't access necessary deliverables because we lost our tech guy. I was the tech guy for multiple players now, and that made my role in the local market undeniable. I spent late nights polishing a professional narrative for myself, updated portfolio, clear terms of service, and airtight contracts that protected my future work. I started requiring written agreements and upfront payments, three things I'd been too nice to demand in the past. With every contract I signed, I felt the old version of me receding. The person who said yes to everything for fear of family fallout was fading, replaced by someone who measured favors by their effect on his life. Then there was the financial discovery that tightened the noose around their confidence. While doing a background check for a prospective client, routine for the contractor I was advising, I spotted a public notice, a tax lien filed against a company that used Aaron and Jenna's business address. The notice was dry and bureaucratic, but the line item, unpaid payroll taxes, stood out like a neon sign. Payroll taxes don't happen by accident. They happen when bills are ignored or siphoned. I cross-referenced a few names and realized some client payments had a trail that led to an account name Aaron and Jenna used for personal expenses. It wasn't definitive proof of fraud, but it was enough to make a prudent client ask hard questions and even more than enough for a competent auditor to start digging. I didn't broadcast any of this to my family. I could have, but drama for drama's sake was never my style. Instead, I fed the legitimate concerns to the contractor and let them follow the paper trail. As professionals, they knew what to do: formal inquiries, verification of ownership, and requests for original documentation. When those requests came in, they forced Aaron and Jenna into uncomfortable corners they'd always avoided because friends and family had shielded them. Their reaction was predictable and useful: panic, excuses, and increasingly reckless attempts to cover tracks. Jenna started messaging me again, but with a different tone: terse, apologetic, borderline pleading, as if she'd suddenly realized I wasn't just a convenient problem solver. Aaron tried to maintain bravado in public, but his calls smelled of smoke. He even tried to patch things by posting vague, performative gratitude on social platforms, grateful for the community, big changes ahead, while privately begging people who owed him favors to hold off inquiries. It was amateur hour at its finest. Meanwhile, my own life continued to improve. Without the shadow of unpaid favors and emotional labor hanging over me, my freelance business grew in ways I hadn't dared hope for. I took a couple of quiet, well-chosen projects that paid well and required me to be visible in the right circles. I declined invitation after invitation to family events with polite notes: "I'm booked that weekend. Maybe next time." That simple boundary reinforced a new image of me: someone with priorities, someone with a calendar other people needed to check. It was small, but in our family dynamic, it was seismic. The last thing I did before making my next move was perhaps the bravest. I wrote a short, highly factual summary of everything: dates, amounts, contributions, links to the proofs, and sent it to my lawyer with one sentence: "This is everything. Prepare the demand, but we don't file yet." The lawyer replied within hours: "Understood. We'll prepare non-confrontational demand letters seeking acknowledgement and compensation. If they refuse, we have several strong next steps." His tone was businesslike and steady, exactly what I wanted. Then, with the legal groundwork in place and the industry starting to ask questions, I scheduled a meeting with Aaron. Not at my parents' house. No theatrics. I picked a small conference room at a co-working space downtown, neutral ground with glass walls and coffee on tap. He arrived late, flustered, without Jenna this time, probably because she didn't want witnesses. For the first time since this all began, he didn't have that practiced charm. He looked smaller. We sat across from each other. I slid an envelope across the table. It contained a concise, professional list of contributions and the exact amount I was requesting for past work, plus a timeline for repayment or acknowledgement. "I'm not here to humiliate you," I said quietly. "I'm here to resolve what should have been resolved years ago." He opened his mouth, then closed it. For a moment, there was silence heavy enough to press. And then he did something I didn't expect. He smiled, but it was a smile that felt like surrender. "Miles," he started, voice soft, "we can work something out. Maybe we can restructure some things. Let's get Jenna in and figure this out." He reached for his phone. That was the exact moment I had been working toward, a fork in the road. He could choose to handle this with the dignity he'd so rarely shown, or he could try his old tactics, appeal to family, spin stories, delay, and hope the storm passed. I sat there, envelope on the table, watching him weigh the options. I had the power to push, to file the demand and make this public, or to hold back and give them a chance to do the right thing quietly. I realized then that revenge wasn't the point. It was leverage, and leverage was a choice. I could use it to destroy them or to force accountability. Either way, their future wouldn't be the same. He tapped his phone screen, then looked up. "Give me a few days," he said. "Talk to Jenna. We'll get back to you." I glanced at the envelope, at the neat list, at the calmness that had become my default. "3 days," I said. "And if I don't hear from you, the next step is formal." I didn't say what that step was. I didn't need to. My silence carried the rest. We left the co-working space separately. I walked out into the autumn air and felt the city press around me, loud, indifferent, alive. My phone buzzed almost immediately with a new message. A forwarded email from a client asking for verification of ownership on a recent deliverable. In the end, the process had already started without me moving another piece. That night, as I reviewed the email and the list I'd given Aaron, a strange calm settled over me. I wasn't angry anymore, not entirely. I was focused. The stage was set. The pieces were in motion. I had a legal foothold, professional credibility, and a market willing to back up what I knew to be true. The rest was timing and temperament. I sat back and thought about what real victory would look like. A public apology? Repayment? A quiet separation where I walked away with my name and my dignity? Each outcome had a cost and a benefit. Each depended on choices the people on the other side were finally being forced to make. And then my phone lit up with a notification, one that sent a cold little thrill through me. It was from an unknown number, a terse voicemail transcription. "You can't just do that, Miles. Call me." I didn't recognize the number. I listened to the voicemail twice. The voice on the recording wasn't Aaron's. It was deeper, urgent, and unfamiliar. Whoever it belonged to had reasons to be worried, and it meant my small, tidy plan was about to collide with consequences I hadn't anticipated. I sat there, the city noise through the window, tea gone cold at my elbow, and realized the game had changed. The moment I'd been building toward, accountability, recognition, and a clean break, was no longer just mine to control. Someone else had just entered the board. The voicemail turned out to be from a partner at one of Aaron's largest clients, a quiet, direct woman who didn't waste breath on drama. I played it 3 times in the quiet of my kitchen. "You need to call me. We're seeing conflicting ownership on deliverables, and our counsel said not to proceed until it's cleared." That was all the fuel I needed. It wasn't threats or yelling. It was the thing Aaron and Jenna relied on most, other people's trust, being quietly peeled away by facts and paperwork. I felt no triumph so much as a steady, cold satisfaction. This was exactly the machine I'd been building. Facts, contracts, and a reputation that actually belonged to me. I moved with a surgeon's calm. No theatrics, no late-night posts, no vindictive emails at 2 a.m. The first cut was practical. I formalized ownership transfers of the modules and assets I'd coded, and packaged them under an LLC I'd set up weeks earlier for precisely this kind of situation. Everything had been prepared: escrow instructions, transfer logs, hashes of original files, timestamps. I wired everything to a secure holding account and granted limited, revocable access to key clients with a professional note, a concise, factual message explaining I was the original creator of the listed deliverables and offering continuity services under clear contractual terms. No accusations, just provenance and an offer to keep their projects moving without interruption. Responses came back the way I expected, measured and immediate. One client replied, "Thanks for the clarity. We can't afford downtime. Can you provide a short-term engagement so we don't lose momentum?" Another asked for a call to verify signatures. The contractor I was advising started asking follow-up questions about licensing and payment trails. Auditors inched closer. Calls that should have been aimed at me, panic calls from Aaron, Jenna, and my parents, were drowned out by legitimate business inquiries that needed answers. I answered those. I was professional, timely, and calm. I stayed on the offensive by providing solutions, not insults. I also let the legal engine I'd set up do its slow, inexorable work. My lawyer sent the demand letter, concise, unemotional, and firm, acknowledgement of contributions, compensation for past services, and an offer of a mediated settlement. It wasn't a sword. It was a clear path that forced them to choose between transparency and, more damaging, public escalation. That letter landed on Aaron's inbox like a measured slap. It was evidence, not rhetoric. He reacted the way people always do when their scaffolding is removed. He flailed, then tried to bargain. He texted me promises and pleas. He called begging for a meeting. I gave him a single option: a professional settlement or a formal process. He chose to stall. It was an instinctive, old tactic: hope the storm passes, and one that would cost him. The real, satisfying turn wasn't legal theatrics. It was simple logistics. While Aaron was buying himself time, clients were looking for a safe pair of hands. I offered short-term contracts with clear terms, timelines, and invoices that didn't funnel through personal accounts. My competitor partner, quiet, respectable, the one who'd first brought me the contractor gig, began absorbing tasks that Aaron's firm could no longer credibly deliver. Within days, deliverables that Aaron had been scheduling started showing up under my oversight. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no public shaming posts. Just reliability where there had been chaos. Contracts moved. Payroll kept its date. The difference in professionalism was stark. Financial pressure followed. A client put a hold on payments pending ownership verification. Another requested audits that found the mixed account breadcrumbs I'd already documented. Payment processors sent notices. Vendors asked for cleared funds. Aaron's small company couldn't operate on reputation alone once the receipts and signatures were questioned. Their line of credit flagged unusual activity. The offices they rented, an indulgence they'd always touted as a sign of status, suddenly mattered less than the cash flow that paid for them. When payroll reports didn't reconcile with declared liabilities, creditors leaned in. What felt most satisfying, and what I'd actually been aiming for all along, was the quiet reallocation of respect. My parents, who had applauded Aaron's Instagram victories for years, were now fielding calls from family friends and distant relatives asking muted questions. Is everything okay at the firm? The protectiveness they'd shown Aaron shifted, awkward, confused. I received one message from Mom that wasn't a plea or a guilt trip but a short, stunned line. "We didn't know." I didn't reply immediately. That one sentence said more than any shouting match could. Aaron's breakdown came in a polite, desperate email to me and the lawyer asking for a settlement arrangement and an extension on payroll. He proposed paying partial sums, asked for backdated attribution on websites, and begged us to avoid public action. It was the same vocabulary of charm and manipulation he'd always used: appeal to sentiment, avoid specifics, delay. My lawyer responded the way a good lawyer does, with a clear deadline and a notice that without agreement we would proceed to formal claims and share provenance documentation with key clients and platforms. The implied next step was exposure. And exposure would cost them public trust and, almost certainly, contracts. I set the meeting for 3 days later. Neutral location. Short agenda. I wanted to see his face when confronted with what professionalism looks like after years of entitlement. I wanted him to consider the ledger of favors, the invoices, the timestamps, the emails he'd used as stepping stones. I wanted him to realize that family was no longer an automatic shield. On the morning of the meeting, I received one last message before heading out. It wasn't from Aaron. It was from a senior contact at a bank. We've been asked to freeze outgoing transfers associated with company name, pending review. That was the soundproof click of the last prop falling. They still had choices: settle quietly, admit fault, repay. Or they could fight, drag the thing into court, and watch the paper trail grow teeth. I walked into the conference room with the envelope in my hand and a quiet steadiness I'd only found over the past months. Aaron arrived 10 minutes late, flustered, looking smaller than I remembered. Jenna wasn't with him. He sat down and opened his mouth. Before he could speak, my phone buzzed with another email. I glanced down. A client had accepted my short-term proposal and signed the first invoice. The sound of pens scratching in a different room, decisions being made, felt oddly like applause. I looked up, and Aaron's face shifted from pleading to panic when he noticed the calmness in my eyes. He stammered, "Miles, please." I laid the envelope on the table, slid it toward him, and said, quietly, the words that had carried me this far. "You used to assume I would always be the safety net. Today you'll decide whether you'll rebuild differently or whether you'll lose the net entirely." He started to argue, then stopped. The door to the conference room opened, and a man I didn't recognize stepped in, suit, clipboard, an air of something official. He didn't smile. He looked at Aaron, then at me, and said, "We're stepping in for due diligence. We'll need records for the last 2 fiscal years." Aaron's color drained. He looked at me, eyes wide, like a child caught mid-game. "What did you do?" he whispered. I didn't answer. I picked up my cup of coffee, sipped slowly, and let the hum of that room, decisive, inevitable, fill the space. Outside, the city carried on. Inside, our family story was finally being rewritten. The rest would depend on choices Aaron and the people around him now had to make. The fallout hit faster than anyone could have expected. Aaron tried to salvage the remnants of his reputation with a flurry of messages, panic calls, and even a last-minute attempt to charm some key clients. But by the time he realized the scale of the exposure, it was too late. The auditor I'd quietly involved had traced every inconsistency, every misallocated invoice, and every claim of ownership. Contracts were frozen. Vendors refused to extend credit. Payroll checks bounced. The very infrastructure Aaron and Jenna had leaned on so heavily, built on my work, their arrogance, and thinly veiled manipulation, crumbled under scrutiny. Jenna attempted to spin social media with carefully curated posts, vague gratitude, optimistic photos, and staged meetings. But the narrative fell flat. Clients shared their confusion and doubt, and industry insiders began to notice the pattern of instability. Her tone, once condescending, now sounded hollow. Every post she thought would restore their image only highlighted how unprepared and overextended they were. The emails from my parents came next. Mom's initial attempts at guilt-tripping were replaced by forced acknowledgement. Short, clipped messages that stopped asking me to forgive, pleading instead for clarification and resolution. Dad's texts were terse and calculated. He never admitted wrongdoing, but the shift was obvious. Their smug certainty that they knew the family dynamics, that Aaron's charm could smooth over anything, had evaporated. Aaron tried to corner me privately, insisting on a face-to-face, family resolution. I agreed, but I set the terms: neutral location, professional demeanor, and no theatrics. In that room, his veneer of confidence finally cracked. He was sweating, fumbling through explanations and excuses, trying to negotiate deadlines and partial repayments. I laid the facts calmly before him. Timestamps, documented work, emails showing credit misappropriation, and the legal channels now aligned with my position. There was no yelling, no vindictive speeches, just clarity and inevitability. "You underestimated me," I said, not as a threat, but as a statement of fact. And now, you're paying for it in the only currency that matters, accountability. He looked at me, pale, realizing that the only thing I had ever lacked was leverage, and now I had it in spades. Please, we can, he started. No, I interrupted. You can accept the settlement or face public and legal exposure. I've done everything to make this fair, professional, and resolvable. The choice isn't mine anymore. It's yours. The weight of inevitability hit him then. He slumped back in his chair, utterly silent. His empire of illusion, the one propped up on my work and the family's naive support, was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The reality was clear. Years of entitlement and manipulation couldn't withstand transparency, diligence, and professionalism. Jenna arrived halfway through the meeting, her attempts at deflection and charm evaporating under the calm precision of the documents and contracts I'd prepared. Her usual laughter, the one that used to cut me down at family gatherings, had disappeared entirely. She could only nod, admitting in silence what Aaron couldn't say aloud. Their success was built on sand. By the end of the day, the settlement was agreed upon. Full acknowledgement of my contributions, repayment for my work, and legally binding clauses preventing any further misrepresentation of my intellectual property. Clients were notified formally, vendors were cleared, and the formal record of accountability was in place. Aaron and Jenna's firm survived only by rebranding and shrinking operations, significantly smaller, far less glamorous, and noticeably quieter in industry circles. As for my parents, they never apologized outright. They never admitted fault in words. But their behavior changed. Invitations came more sparingly, messages were less judgmental, and the constant expectation that I would be the emotional and professional crutch vanished. They had seen the consequences of blind loyalty and manipulation firsthand, and now, quietly, they respected the boundaries I had drawn. I, meanwhile, thrived. My independent projects flourished. My name carried weight in professional circles for the first time on my own merits, without any shadow of family influence. I didn't gloat, didn't post on social media, didn't need validation. Everything I had quietly built, every calculated move, had secured not just recognition, but control over my life in a way that my family never could have imagined. The final, satisfying moment came one evening when I received an invitation to speak at an industry conference, something I had only dreamed of doing while Aaron and Jenna still mocked my slow, behind-the-scenes work. Standing at the podium, introducing myself to hundreds of professionals who recognized me for my expertise, I realized the truth. I had been underestimated my entire life, but now the underestimated one was the one holding the map. And in that moment, the city lights behind me twinkling through the conference hall windows, I whispered to myself, quietly and with satisfaction, sometimes the best revenge isn't loud. It's inevitable. I'm Jude, 31 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that family loyalty was the highest currency a person could have. My mom used to tell me, family is everything, Jude. No matter how bad things get, we're all we've got. I carried that line like a badge of honor. Through college, through years of scraping by, and through the business I eventually built from the ground up. It wasn't easy, but I was proud of it. What I didn't realize until much later was that my family had twisted that phrase into something entirely different. Family is everything, as long as you're the one paying for it. It all started to shift the day I overheard a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. But before I get to that, you need to understand the background, how things got to that point, how I became the savior they mocked behind my back. I grew up as the oldest of three, with a mom who had a talent for guilt-tripping people into doing things for her. My dad left when I was 12, and from then on, I was told I was the man of the house. My mom said it with this heavy sigh, like the weight of the world had fallen on both our shoulders. But what it really meant was that I was expected to fix everything, from broken appliances to broken hearts, including hers. When I turned 21, I started a small home repair business. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and I worked insane hours to make it stable. I remember those first few years being a blur of tools, invoices, and long nights. But as the business grew, So did my family's needs. My mom's rent was always a little behind. My aunt, her sister, Miriam, was constantly between jobs. My cousin Lucas needed a temporary loan to pay off his car. Temporary was their favorite word. At first, I didn't mind helping. I told myself it was what family did. I paid my mom's rent for a few months, covered my aunt's overdue bills, and let Lucas work part-time at my company when he said he wanted to learn the ropes. I thought maybe I could help him find some direction. He was a few years younger than me, mid-20s, and had that kind of confidence that comes without ever being tested by real life. He called himself entrepreneurial, but the only ventures he ever managed were financed by someone else's patience. After a while, it wasn't even them asking anymore. It was expected. My mom would call and say things like, "Oh, your aunt's power got cut again. You know she's been struggling." Or, "Lucas is trying to get back on his feet. It would mean a lot if you helped him out." Every time, she made it sound like I was doing something noble, like I was the glue holding everyone together. I didn't realize how warped that dynamic had become until about a year ago, when I offered to help my aunt open a small cleaning service. She'd always been good with organizing and people, so I thought it might give her a sense of independence. I invested in the startup costs, created the website, and handled most of the paperwork under my business umbrella. She and Lucas were supposed to handle clients and scheduling, while I took care of the finances and logistics. In exchange, they'd get paid a fair cut. It seemed like a win-win. At first, things looked promising. We landed a few steady clients, and the reviews were good. I even remember feeling proud, like I'd helped my family stand on their own feet. But slowly, the pattern began to repeat itself. My aunt started calling me during work hours, asking for advances on her cut before invoices had cleared. My mom kept reminding me how much stress my aunt was under, implying I should just let things slide. Lucas was constantly late with his tasks and spent more time talking about how he was the real brains behind the business than actually contributing to it. I tried to ignore it. I told myself people needed time to adjust, to grow into responsibility. But the little things piled up. Lucas bought a new gaming console after telling me he couldn't afford his rent. My aunt forgot to log a few client payments. My mom started inviting herself to meetings she had no reason to attend, making comments like, "I'm just here to make sure everyone's happy, Jude." But I knew she wasn't there to help. She was there to supervise me, as if I was the one who needed oversight. Then came the family barbecue. It was one of those early summer Sundays when the air smells like charcoal and sunscreen. My mom insisted on hosting it in my backyard since I had the nice space. I didn't argue. I bought all the groceries, grilled the food, made sure everyone had drinks. I wanted things to feel peaceful again, maybe even normal. After everyone had eaten, I went inside to grab more ice. The kitchen window was open, and through it, I could hear my mom and Aunt Miriam talking at the picnic table. Their voices carried easily in the still air. "He thinks we're grateful," my aunt said, her tone dripping with amusement. My mom let out that sharp little laugh I've hated since childhood, the one that always meant she'd been caught saying something she didn't want me to hear. "Let him keep playing the savior," she snorted. "As long as he's paying the bills, I don't care what he thinks." They both laughed. It wasn't loud or cruel, just dismissive, like I was some fool they were humoring. I froze, the ice bag crinkling in my hand. For a moment, I couldn't move. The sound of their laughter hit harder than I expected. I wasn't angry right away, just hollow. It felt like someone had reached inside my chest and flipped a switch I didn't know existed. I stood there for a while, just listening as they went on. My aunt started talking about how she might branch off from the cleaning business soon, saying she didn't want to be under Jude's thumb forever. My mom replied, "He'll still help. He always does. He needs to feel useful." I remember walking back outside, pretending nothing happened. I handed out drinks, smiled at jokes, and even helped my cousin set up a game of cards. But inside, something had shifted. For the first time, I looked at them and saw not family, but people who saw me as a tool, a wallet with legs. That night, after everyone left, I sat on the back steps with a beer I didn't even want and thought about every favor I'd ever done. Every late payment I'd forgiven, every time I'd heard, "You're so good to us, Jude." and believed it. I didn't sleep much that night. Over the next few weeks, I watched things with new eyes. The calls from my mom came with the same guilt-laden tone, but I noticed how she never asked about me, just about what she or someone else needed. My aunt still missed client deadlines, and Lucas still bragged about his business to anyone who'd listen. I realized that if I disappeared tomorrow, they'd only care about the financial hole I left behind. Then, one morning, while reviewing invoices, I noticed something strange. 2 payments marked as received, but not recorded in our shared account. The clients confirmed they'd already paid directly to my aunt. When I asked her about it, she brushed it off with a laugh and said, "Oh, I must have forgotten to transfer it. You know how busy things get." That was the moment something clicked. I wasn't just being taken for granted. I was being stolen from. And that's when I quietly started planning. I didn't confront anyone right away. I smiled through phone calls, went to family dinners, and let them think everything was fine. But inside, I was making a list. Every invoice, every transfer, every receipt. I started documenting everything, slowly and carefully. Because if they wanted to see me as their savior, they were about to learn what happened when that savior stopped saving. And that brings me to the moment everything began to unravel. The month I finally ended the business partnership that paid their rent. That's when the panic started. The texts, the calls, the accusations. But the very first one came from Lucas. He texted, "You're overreacting." I remember staring at the screen, my heart pounding, but my hands completely steady. I took a deep breath, typed my reply, and hit send. After I sent that text to Lucas, I didn't hear from him for a few hours. That silence felt heavier than any argument I'd ever had with him or anyone else in the family. It was like the calm before a storm, the kind that makes you suddenly aware of just how fragile a situation has been, even if you've been pretending otherwise for years. By the time my phone buzzed again, it wasn't him, it was my mom. "Jude, we need to talk," her text read. Short, simple, and commanding. I knew her tone well enough to know it wasn't a casual conversation. It was the precursor to guilt, anger, and manipulation all rolled into one. I stared at the screen for a while, thinking about how many times I had dropped everything at her call, how many evenings I'd canceled plans because family emergencies were never really emergencies. They were just her way of controlling my time and my money. I decided to go over. I needed to see what kind of narrative she was spinning now that I had pulled the plug on her little business lifeline. When I arrived, she greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The kind of smile that said, "I'm calm, but you're about to be on the defensive." We sat in the living room. She began casually, like she didn't know anything had changed. "So, Jude, I hear you've made some big decisions with the business." She tilted her head, letting the sentence hang there. I nodded slightly, saying nothing, because I wanted her to fill the silence. "You know," she continued, her voice soft but calculated, "it's really going to be tough on your aunt and Lucas. They were relying on you. And, well, I guess it's just hard to understand how someone can make these choices without thinking about others." I felt a cold pulse of anger. Without thinking about others? I had been thinking about others for years, more than anyone else in that room could possibly imagine. I took a slow breath before replying. "I've thought about them every day. That's why I'm doing this. They're not responsible adults. They've been taking advantage of me, Mom. I can't keep doing it for them." She tilted her head, and that familiar smirk surfaced. "Jude, you always think you're so mature, so capable. But maybe you're overestimating how much they really need you. Maybe this is a lesson in humility." I could feel my stomach twist. This wasn't concern, it was manipulation. She was trying to frame me as the one at fault, the one who had made a mistake by stopping my support. I didn't let her see that I noticed. I just nodded and stayed quiet, letting her speak herself into frustration. It didn't take long. She went on to talk about Lucas, about how he was so talented, how he deserved a chance, and how she never wanted to be a burden on me or anyone else. It was all so carefully worded. Every phrase built to guilt me without directly saying it. I could almost hear her thinking, make him squirm, make him question himself, and make him wonder if he was wrong for pulling away. And then she shifted. She started recounting stories from my childhood, as if my own memories could be used against me. Do you remember that summer after your dad left? I had to work 3 jobs just to keep a roof over our heads. You were so little, but you handled it like a grown-up. I had to rely on you for everything. Everything, Jude. And now you won't even let your family lean on you. I swallowed hard. Every word was familiar. Every memory she invoked was one she had weaponized before. I wanted to shout, to tell her she'd used me my whole life, that I'd done more for her than anyone else ever would. But I didn't. I stayed calm. That was my power now, the power of not reacting. When I left, the tension didn't ease. It only grew. Over the next few days, the texts came in waves. Lucas sending passive-aggressive messages about how I was too harsh or overreacting. My aunt trying to explain how hard it was for her to run the cleaning service alone. My mom weaving long, manipulative emails about how family means sacrifice and how I was letting everyone down. The worst part wasn't even the messages themselves. It was the mental gymnastics I had to do to stay objective. Every time I read something, a small part of me wanted to apologize, to give in, to explain that I had only wanted to help. But I knew the truth. No apology would ever make them stop. They didn't see me as a person. They saw me as a resource. Then came the dinner party. It was my cousin's birthday, and naturally, my family assumed I'd cater, clean, and entertain while they enjoyed themselves. I considered saying no, but I wanted to see them in their natural state, without any pretense of gratitude. I wanted to see how they behaved when I was still providing, yet standing back. And that's when the favoritism became blatant. Lucas received compliments for the tiniest efforts, setting the table, helping a neighbor carry a cake, and my aunt's new business savvy was celebrated with exaggerated praise. Meanwhile, I was expected to do all the setup, make sure everyone had what they needed, and even handle complaints about the food. When I politely declined one of the tasks, my mom's eyes narrowed, and she muttered, "I guess not everyone can handle responsibility." I felt a wave of déjà vu. Every family event had followed this pattern. I give, they receive, they belittle. And now it wasn't just subtle, it was performative. They were flaunting the power I had unknowingly given them for years. A particularly painful moment came when my aunt cornered me in the kitchen. "You know, Jude," she said casually, "Lucas is going to be running that cleaning business soon. He's the one with the real vision. I mean, I've been doing my part, but it's his future now. You just financed it all." Her tone was light, almost flirtatious, as if admitting her manipulations to me directly was harmless fun. I stood there, the steam from the oven rising around me, my hands gripping the edge of the counter so tightly I thought my knuckles might crack. I felt the old surge of guilt she always triggered, but this time I didn't give in. I didn't apologize. I just nodded and said, "I'm glad you're both excited about the future." She blinked at me, clearly expecting a different reaction, before walking away with a smug little smile. I realized then how long I had been playing their game without noticing it, how long I had allowed them to frame themselves as the victims while I carried the burden of being the responsible adult. The next week, I noticed another pattern I hadn't fully recognized before. My aunt had started redirecting clients away from the official account and into her own personal one, claiming she was experimenting with new payment methods. Lucas began casually mentioning that he was thinking about investing in a side hustle with my aunt, never mentioning that it was all funded by the business I had created. My mom chimed in during a casual phone call, suggesting I should consider lending them some more for startup expenses because they were a family and it would teach them to trust you. By then, I had fully documented everything: emails, payments, messages, verbal confirmations. I had spreadsheets, screenshots, a running tally of lost revenue. It was meticulous, but necessary. Because if I was going to take a stand, I wasn't going to do it half-heartedly. I wasn't going to let them twist the story into one where I was the villain. Then came the final straw, the text that pushed me to the point of no return. Lucas sent me a screenshot of a post on a social media forum, bragging about how my cousin Jude is so generous. He finances everything for us while we focus on our dreams. Truly a saint. It was tagged with a picture of him and my aunt at some client site, smiling and looking competent. I stared at it, Reading the words over and over, I realized something critical. They weren't just taking advantage, they were performing it. They weren't just enjoying my generosity, they were flaunting it to the world, treating it as some kind of badge that made them look virtuous while I was cast as the enabler. My blood boiled, not with anger at them, but with a steely resolve. I knew then that this wasn't going to be a quiet lesson. This wasn't going to be a minor confrontation. This was going to be a slow, deliberate revelation of just how much they had been relying on me under the guise of family love. I leaned back in my chair, staring at my laptop screen. I could feel the tension building, like a rope being slowly pulled taut around everyone's neck. I knew what needed to happen, and I knew the timing had to be perfect. Every misstep, every oversight, every casual assumption they had made about me being too kind would be documented and leveraged. And for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't the one carrying all the weight anymore. I didn't reply to Lucas that night. I didn't call my mom. I just sat with the knowledge that the storm I had been quietly planning was almost ready to hit. But before I could act, something unexpected happened. Something that threatened to change the timing. Something that made me realize just how fragile their control over me had been. It started with a single message from my aunt. One sentence that made my heart skip. "Are you really going to let us fail?" After my aunt's text, I felt a chill run through me, the kind that makes you instinctively check every angle, every possible motive, every past action. "Are you really going to let us fail?" she wrote. It wasn't a question. It was a loaded statement, a subtle threat disguised as a plea. And I knew it was intended to poke at the one thing I had always valued, my family. But something in me had shifted. The Jude who would have dropped everything at her cry for help was gone. The Jude who believed family loyalty was sacred had slowly been replaced by someone who could see manipulation for what it truly was. For the next few days, tension hovered in the house like smoke from a grill left burning too long. Every message, every phone call, every casual comment felt like a calculated test. Lucas sent more screenshots, showing him at a client site I hadn't even been informed about. "Look, we're totally killing it without micromanagement," he wrote with a grin emoji. My mom called, voice smooth and saccharine, pretending to care. "Jude, are you sure you don't want to reconsider? You've done so much already, maybe think of what it means to them." And of course, my aunt called, always warm on the surface, always begging, always justifying. "Jude, I thought we were in this together. I trusted you to help me, to guide me. Now it feels like you're abandoning me at the worst possible moment." I didn't respond immediately. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing how their words affected me. But internally, I was boiling, my thoughts spinning into a slow, deliberate strategy. The more they tried to pull me back in, the clearer the betrayal became. Then it happened. The moment that cemented everything I had suspected, the act that drew a red line across our relationship. I was going through my business accounts one morning, making sure the new system I'd implemented was airtight, when I noticed something strange, a large withdrawal that didn't make sense. Not a missing invoice, not a misfiled payment. This was deliberate. Someone had taken funds directly from the business account I had set up for the cleaning service. Funds that weren't just mine. They were meant to be split fairly between my aunt and Lucas as compensation for their work. I pulled up the transaction history, my eyes scanning numbers and dates like a detective reading a crime scene. And then I saw it. The transfer had been made to a private account in my aunt's name, labeled vaguely as operational expenses. Only it wasn't operational expenses. I called the bank to verify. Every detail confirmed my worst suspicion. They had siphoned money that wasn't theirs, that I had earmarked specifically for payroll and client reimbursements. I didn't explode. Not yet. I stared at the screen, heart hammering, and let the enormity of it settle in. My aunt had crossed a line that couldn't be ignored. They had betrayed the very foundation of trust we had supposedly built. I sent a text to my aunt, keeping it measured, cold. Why was money withdrawn from the account without authorization? The reply came almost immediately. "It's fine, Jude. Just covering some bills. Don't worry about it. We'll pay it back." I could feel the old instincts rising. Urges to forgive, urges to explain, urges to reassure. But I didn't. Instead, I let silence linger. I watched. I waited. Over the next week, I noticed other small signs. My mom began subtly undermining me in conversations with other relatives. "Oh, Jude's been so busy with work, he barely has time to understand how businesses really operate," she said once during a family brunch, smiling at Lucas as if to signal, "See, he's not infallible." My aunt started omitting me from client emails, sending correspondence directly to Lucas, framing him as the primary contact. It was as if they were erasing my presence entirely while still enjoying the benefits I had built for them. And then, Lucas did the unthinkable. He had been handling a particularly lucrative client on his own while my aunt stood by, mentoring him. One morning, I discovered that he had signed a long-term contract in his name, diverting profits from the cleaning business entirely to a separate account, one I had no access to. Not only had he violated our agreement, he had done so in a way that made it look legitimate to outsiders. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Every late payment, every excuse, every lie had been building up to this betrayal, and now it was tangible, undeniable, and audacious. I called Lucas immediately, and the conversation went exactly as I had predicted. "Jude, chill," he said, voice casual. "It's all under control. I'm just handling things the way I think is best. Don't worry about it." I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. "Under control? You diverted our client's funds to a personal account. That's not under control, Lucas. That's theft." He laughed, a sharp, irritating sound. "You're overreacting. It's not like you can't take care of yourself. We're just making things more efficient." I hung up. My hands shook. Not from fear, but from rage. Pure, simmering, calculated rage. The realization hit me in that instant. These weren't just small manipulations or entitlement-fueled requests. They had been systematically undermining everything I had built while pretending to rely on my help. They hadn't just taken my generosity, they had weaponized it against me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk, staring at spreadsheets, tracing payments, making lists of every instance of financial manipulation, every misrepresentation, every calculated slight. My mom's manipulative comments, my aunt's forgetfulness, Lucas's audacious diversions. They weren't isolated incidents. They were a pattern, one I had finally recognized in its full scope. I also realized something else. Every single one of them believed they could control me. They believed that because I had always prioritized family, I would never take a stand. They believed that guilt, shame, and fear of confrontation would keep me in line. And in that moment, I made a decision. If they wanted to see me as the enabler, as the fall guy, as the saint financing their lives, they were about to learn what happened when the saint finally walked away. The next day, I started laying the groundwork for what would be the most precise, deliberate dismantling of the business arrangement that had been a safety net for them. I reached out to a lawyer to ensure that the contracts were airtight, that every withdrawal could be legally challenged, and that the consequences would be enforceable. I updated client agreements, formalized payroll, and created a separate account to ensure that no unauthorized access could happen again. The most difficult part wasn't the logistics, it was the anticipation. Every call, every text, every email I ignored built tension. My mom sent messages dripping with false concern. "Jude, please, think about the family. You're tearing us apart." My aunt sent desperate pleas. "I don't know how we'll survive without your guidance." Lucas, of course, continued flaunting his new autonomy, convinced I was too soft to act. Then came the weekend of the neighborhood fair. My aunt and Lucas had signed up for a booth showcasing their cleaning business. They were going around, boasting to anyone who would listen about the team that had made it possible, conveniently leaving my contributions unmentioned. And that was when I realized this betrayal wasn't just financial, it was reputational. They were taking my hard work, twisting it to make themselves look competent, and leaving me as the invisible force keeping them afloat. That afternoon, I found them laughing with clients, Lucas holding a clipboard as if he had single-handedly built the business, my aunt chattering about how supportive my cousin is. The words stung because they were technically true, but the intention behind them made my blood boil. They had spent years cultivating an image of dependency, and now they were using it as a weapon, turning my generosity into public performance. I retreated to the back of the fair, heart racing, mind mapping every step of what was to come. I realized then that this wasn't just about reclaiming money or authority. It was about teaching them a lesson they couldn't ignore. A lesson that would make them feel the weight of every selfish decision, every mock, every manipulation. And yet, even as I plotted, I couldn't help but feel the old pangs of guilt creeping in. Am I being too harsh? Am I losing my humanity in this fight? I shoved those thoughts away. No, this wasn't cruelty. This was justice. This was finally acknowledging the imbalance that had been in place for decades. By the time I got home, I had a complete picture. Every withdrawal, every diverted client, every lie was documented. Every text, email, and recorded conversation was logged. The betrayal wasn't small. It was systemic, deliberate, and unrelenting. My family had banked on my patience, my loyalty, and my silence. And for the first time, silence wasn't my weapon. Action would be. I sat at my desk, staring at the glow of my laptop screen, knowing that the next step had to be precise. One wrong move, one premature action, and it could all blow back on me. But I was ready. I was calm. I was deliberate. After the betrayal, I felt like I had been punched in the gut. The kind of punch that doesn't just hurt your body, but leaves a bruise across your entire sense of reality. I went through the motions for a while, answering emails, checking client accounts, pretending nothing was wrong, but every interaction with my family felt like walking on thin ice over a frozen lake. One wrong move, and I would shatter under their manipulations. I didn't explode, though, and that was deliberate. My strategy now was patience, observation, and careful documentation. The moment I reacted emotionally, I would give them leverage. So I learned to bite my tongue, to walk away from their attempts at guilt tripping. My mom would send me long, dramatic texts about how family was crumbling and how they'd never survive without me. Lucas would send messages about how you don't understand the stress we're under, trying to provoke frustration. My aunt would call, voice dripping with faux concern, saying things like, "I just want to talk about how we can make this easier for everyone." I answered none of them. At first, it felt like rock bottom. The sting of betrayal combined with the withdrawal of control over my own contributions left a hollow ache. I realized how deeply I had invested in people who were never truly invested in me. I had spent decades believing in their loyalty, only to discover they viewed me as a walking ATM, an unpaid manager, and a soft target. The realization hit hard, and for a moment, I questioned my judgment, my priorities, even myself. But underneath that ache was clarity, the kind of clarity that comes when you finally see things for what they are. I decided I needed distance, both physically and emotionally. I stopped volunteering for family errands, stopped answering non-essential calls, and stopped checking in with my aunt and Lucas under the guise of mentorship. It was awkward at first. My mom would drop by unannounced, standing in the doorway with her forced smile, asking, "Just came by to see how you're doing, Jude." I replied politely, "Yes, I was fine," and that was that. No elaboration, no invites to drama. She would leave after a few minutes, muttering under her breath. The shift in power was subtle but unmistakable. At work, I poured myself into the business I had built. I restructured client accounts, secured new contracts, and implemented tighter financial controls. I stopped covering for people who had abused my trust, even outside the family. It was hard, because there was always a pang of guilt. What if they really were struggling? But I reminded myself that the struggling had been performative for years. I was no longer their safety net. The more I focused on my work, the more I realized how much I had underestimated my own capacity. I started taking on projects I'd previously avoided, thinking I didn't have the time. I began hiring competent staff to handle the operational load, freeing me to focus on strategy and growth. Slowly but surely, revenue increased. Clients commented on the improved responsiveness and professionalism of my business. I realized that without the constant interruptions, the unpaid labor of supporting my family, I could actually thrive. Emotionally, I felt lighter. The constant anxiety of trying to balance their needs with my own had been exhausting. For the first time in years, I could plan my schedule around me, not them. Weekends were mine. Vacations were mine. Even little things, like sleeping in without guilt or eating lunch at a proper time, felt revolutionary. I was reclaiming my life. Yet, even as I rose, the family's presence lingered like a shadow. They didn't know I had begun restructuring my finances, documenting every betrayal, every misappropriated dollar. They didn't know I had consulted a lawyer about how to legally sever business ties while protecting myself. But I could feel their unease starting to manifest in small ways. A text from Lucas asking, "When will you call us again?" read like a challenge rather than a question. My aunt's calls became more frequent, but increasingly perfunctory. My mom started dropping hints about needing advice on financial planning, a passive attempt to regain some control. It was in that space, between their frantic attempts to pull me back in and my own steady rebuilding, that I realized I had power. Not the kind of power that comes from yelling or threatening, but the kind that comes from knowing exactly what you can do and when. I knew that every future step I took could be decisive. Every contract I signed, every client I onboard, every financial structure I implemented was a brick in the wall separating me from their entitlement. I also started leveraging that power quietly in other areas of my life. I began investing in ventures I had always wanted to explore, but had previously postponed because of family obligations. I took classes, networked with professionals, and explored side projects that could generate passive income. I felt the thrill of creating something entirely mine, something that required no compromise, no justification, no guilt. One evening, I sat down and looked at the cleaning business ledgers. Every misappropriated payment, every diverted client account, every lie documented in neat spreadsheets stared back at me. I realized that I didn't have to confront them immediately. I didn't have to yell, argue, or defend myself. The evidence was there. I could act strategically, and when the time came, I would do so in a way that would be undeniable and irreversible. And as I worked, I began to notice subtle changes in their behavior. Lucas started bragging on social media more aggressively, but the posts lacked the confidence he used to feign. They felt forced. My aunt's business updates became inconsistent, almost panicked. My mom, ever the orchestrator, tried to regain influence through feigned vulnerability, but her manipulations were thin, brittle, transparent. I realized that by stepping back, by refusing to feed into their entitlement, I had shifted the balance of power. They were accustomed to me reacting to their every whim, bending around their needs. Now that I didn't, the cracks were showing. And that gave me a quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes not from revenge itself, but from seeing the truth of their dependency laid bare. At the same time, my own life began to improve in ways I hadn't anticipated. Without the constant drain, I had energy to maintain friendships, to explore hobbies, to finally invest in myself. I even started dating again, something I had avoided for years because my life was perpetually too busy with family obligations. I felt a sense of normalcy I hadn't known for a long time, and it fueled my confidence. And yet, I knew this was only the beginning. The betrayal, the manipulation, the entitlement, they hadn't disappeared. They were lurking, waiting for any sign of weakness, any crack in my resolve. But I had learned patience, strategy, and above all, self-respect. I knew I could rise higher, build more, and regain what had been mine all along, without the chains of their expectations dragging me down. I also began to experiment subtly with influence. I allowed small mistakes to go uncorrected, observing how they handled them. I kept detailed notes on every lie, every omission, every attempt to manipulate. And the more I watched, the clearer it became. They were panicking, though they didn't yet realize why. Their entitlement had met its match, and the match was deliberate, calculated, and unyielding. It was during this period, quietly and methodically, that I realized the true lesson. Power wasn't about confrontation. It wasn't about yelling or shaming or even cutting ties immediately. Power was about control over yourself and over your environment. By taking care of myself first, by reclaiming time, finances, and energy, I had created leverage that no one in my family could anticipate. I could see it now. Every future interaction could be a calculated step, a deliberate assertion of autonomy. Every attempt they made to guilt me, manipulate me, or coerce me could be countered, not with anger, but with structure, evidence, and quiet resolve. And in that quiet, calculated rise, I felt something I hadn't in years: hope. Not just hope for myself, but for the life I had been denied by their entitlement, for the career I had nearly let be derailed, and for the personal growth that came from finally putting myself first. The family still thought they held the strings. They didn't realize that by underestimating me, by taking my loyalty and generosity for granted, they had created a scenario where their reliance on me was their weakness. And when the time came, I would exploit it. But I didn't act immediately. That would come later. Right now, I was focused on building, observing, and quietly solidifying my position. Let them keep believing they were in control. Let them continue their performances, their passive-aggressive jabs, their faux bravado. It would all make the eventual revelation that much more devastating. For the first time in a long time, I felt steady. I wasn't just surviving the situation anymore. I was quietly, deliberately reclaiming my life. And the knowledge of what I could do, when the time came, gave me a sense of power I had never experienced before. Over the next few months, I continued my quiet rise. I stayed professional with my family, outwardly calm, almost pleasant, while I solidified my control over the business and my personal life. Every interaction was deliberate. I answered calls when convenient, responded to texts minimally, and always left them waiting. They tried to provoke reactions, but I refused to give them any. The tension was palpable. I could sense it in their tone, their phrasing, even in small gestures like Lucas tapping impatiently at his phone or my aunt frowning at client updates she couldn't access. One of the most critical things I realized during this period was how much my family relied on appearances rather than reality. They were masters of storytelling, convincing themselves and others that they were competent, industrious, and independent, when in reality, they were dependent on my work and money. That meant that if I wanted to hit them where it would hurt, I had to be patient and strategic. Evidence and leverage would matter far more than confrontation. The opportunity came almost by accident. I had started working with a financial consultant to restructure my business and personal accounts to prevent future mismanagement. I wanted airtight protections so that no one, family included, could ever divert funds or manipulate client revenue without being held accountable. During a meeting, the consultant casually mentioned the value of leveraging equity in one's business to secure partnerships and long-term investments. Something clicked. I realized that by restructuring my holdings, I could not only protect myself, but gain power in a way my family could never anticipate. They had been thriving on my generosity, but they had no real insight into my strategic position. They assumed I was reactive and emotionally tied, but in reality, I could make moves that would completely change the power dynamic, and they wouldn't see it coming. Over the next several weeks, I quietly moved forward. I formalized ownership agreements for the cleaning business, making sure that any large expenditures, client contracts, or withdrawals required my explicit approval. I set up independent accounts for payroll and revenue distribution. I didn't inform them of these changes yet. I wanted to maintain the illusion that they were still in control, still capable of relying on my generosity. At the same time, I began exploring ways to expand my influence beyond just the cleaning business. I started networking with other local businesses, attending small industry events, and quietly building a portfolio of side projects. I discovered I had a knack for negotiations and contracts that I'd never fully utilized because I had been too busy covering for my family. With every successful partnership, every new client, I felt my confidence grow. I realized that I wasn't just protecting myself. I was positioning myself to make decisions that could have real consequences for the people who had betrayed me. Lucas and my aunt remained oblivious. They continued their small, performative efforts to maintain a facade of competence. My mom continued to send passive-aggressive messages, suggesting that I reconsider and think of the family, but I had grown immune to her guilt tactics. I observed them like a chess player studying the moves of a predictable opponent. They were predictable because they relied on entitlement, not skill. And I knew that predictability would be my greatest advantage. One day, while reviewing the cleaning business accounts, I found another pattern I hadn't fully realized before. Every time my aunt or Lucas tried to divert funds or manipulate clients, they left digital traces, emails, transaction histories, and inconsistencies in reporting. I began creating a detailed dossier of every action, compiling evidence methodically. Every unauthorized withdrawal, every missed payment, every lie was documented. I realized that with this information, I could control the narrative entirely. I also learned something else crucial. They underestimated me because I had always been compliant. They assumed I would act emotionally, that I would forgive, or that I would hesitate. That assumption was a vulnerability I could exploit. My calm, measured approach made me invisible to them in the moments when I was planning, observing, and setting up the infrastructure for the eventual reckoning. By the time they realized I had completely insulated the business and my personal finances, I would already be in a position of undeniable authority. They would be reliant on systems I controlled, without the faintest understanding of how precarious their situation was. Every attempt to manipulate me further would fail because I had fortified my position and had evidence to support any decisive action I chose to take. It was during one late-night session, reviewing all the records, that I finally felt ready. I could see the contours of the strategy forming clearly, a slow, deliberate dismantling of their entitlement, using leverage and evidence rather than confrontation. They would panic first, scrambling to maintain appearances. I would remain calm, deliberate, and in control. And the most important part, I realized I didn't need to act immediately. Timing was everything. I would wait until the moment was perfect, when their reliance on me, their entitlement, and their public facade aligned perfectly for maximum impact. When that moment came, there would be no excuses, no rationalizations, no room for manipulation. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of power that wasn't tied to emotional reactions or guilt. I had reclaimed control over my life, my work, and my boundaries. I had positioned myself so that the scales of power had shifted entirely in my favor, and the people who had relied on my compliance would soon learn the consequences of underestimating me. But for now, I waited. Quietly, strategically, deliberately. Every move was calculated. Every observation noted. Every relationship mapped. The groundwork for the ultimate lesson, the reckoning they had unknowingly earned, was complete. The thing about revenge is that it never felt like catharsis in the movies. It felt like work, cold, boring, precise work, and I was suddenly very, very willing to do the work. I'd spent months building a case, not because I wanted to hurt people I grew up with, but because I needed them to feel the consequences of what they'd been doing while pretending to be victims. I wanted the panic to be theirs, not mine. Execution day started on a gray Tuesday. I woke up earlier than usual, made coffee, and went through my checklist like a pilot running pre-flight checks. Lawyer on standby, check. New business bank account active and funded, check. Copies of every invoice, email, and unauthorized transfer printed and organized, check. Client agreements updated with new billing details and emailed out, check. Certified letters terminating the informal partnership and detailing breaches of contract, overnight. I didn't tell them anything beyond what would have to be revealed in public and legal channels. The art of this kind of revenge was timing and optics. Do it professionally, make it undeniable, and let the fallout come from truth rather than theatrics. First, I changed the payment instructions for the cleaning service. Technically, I couldn't seize accounts that weren't in my name, so I didn't. What I did do was make sure every client whose invoice had ever been routed through our business now had clear, verifiable instructions to pay the company account controlled by me. I sent calm, professional emails to each client. Short, factual, no venom. Effective immediately, I wrote, for continuity of service and billing compliance, please redirect payments to the following account. We will be transitioning management to ensure uninterrupted service. Attached were new contracts and an explanation that the company had been restructured for compliance. I signed them as the managing partner, because legally, I was. Then I called the biggest clients personally. I didn't lie. I didn't beg. I explained that there had been internal mismanagement and that I had taken responsibility to ensure quality control. I told them clearly that if anything about past payments looked irregular, I would refund or rectify it immediately. Most people simply wanted their problems solved. They appreciated someone who acted like a professional. Several clients said, almost apologetically, "We didn't realize. Thank you for taking care of this." Those calls were tiny triumphs. In a matter of hours, deposits started going into the new account. Contracts were signed. The cleaning schedule continued uninterrupted, but now the income stream that had sustained my aunt and Lucas's little performative empire was being rerouted. Next came the landlord. This was the piece I'd reserved for later, but realized I could accelerate without crossing a legal line. I sent a formal notice, on lawyer letterhead, informing him that moving forward, rent payments were being repaid through the company as part of a restructuring of personal loans and liabilities. It wasn't a threat, it was a status update. The letter included documentation of the payments I had made historically and the recent unauthorized withdrawals from the company account. I wasn't trying to evict anyone with theatrics. I was trying to put the landlord in the loop so that when rent stopped arriving from the family's usual account, the landlord would be able to verify the change of circumstances and communicate directly with me. Transparency was a tool. If their safety net evaporated, it had to look like unfortunate arithmetic, not malice. I also took care of reputation. Social media had been their stage for months. I posted nothing, but I quietly reached out to a few community pages and local groups that had been sharing their success posts and asked them to verify one small thing. Is the business registered under the name being posted about? The pages did a simple check and quietly removed the misleading tags from the posts. It was petty and perfect, small dents in the carefully curated image they'd been cultivating. By noon, the text started. My aunt's first message was deceptively calm. "Jude, did you get my letter?" I didn't reply. The lawyer handled that channel. My answers came through a professional voice explaining the steps I'd taken to secure the business and that any questions should be directed to counsel. I wanted no room for emotional manipulation. My mother called, desperate and theatrical, asking me to please reconsider, the same line she'd used for years. I let the calls go to voicemail and listen later. Each message was a piece of the old pattern: fear, guilt, feigned helplessness. The panic was slower than I expected. It was not immediate hysteria, it was an arithmetic panic. Clients shifted payment timelines. Invoices were rerouted, and conversations that had been casual and confident became strained and halting when prospective customers asked for formal contracts. I watched as their confidence, which had always been projection, dissolved into logistical problems, missed deposits, unexpected audit questions, requests they had no documentation to answer. People who'd offered compliments at family dinners now had legitimate questions about where their money was actually going. That ripple hurt because it was precise. Their performative competence had never been backed by paperwork, and suddenly people wanted paperwork. The first time one of them confronted me in person, it was almost anticlimactic. My aunt showed up at my office dripping with indignation. "You don't have to do this," she said, voice shaking with a mixture of fear and anger. "You're making us look terrible." I met her without drama. "I didn't make you look terrible," I replied. "You chose how you presented yourselves. I chose to protect what I built. That's all." She asked about refunds, about payroll, about clients, all the while trying to wrap her fear in indignation. My answers were clinical. "We'll reconcile the accounts. All expenses will be reviewed. Unauthorized withdrawals will be disputed, and if necessary, legal action will be taken. No guilting, no pleading, just facts." That night, my phone became a bell. Messages, then calls, then a group text that started civil and devolved into accusation. "You're ruining us," Lucas wrote, all caps replaced by ellipses and a tone that tried to sound hurt rather than guilty. "We had plans, Jude. You can't just—" The texts were angry, then panicked, then pleading. My mom's voice message alternated between betrayal and a refrain she'd used since I was a kid: "We're family." I sat on my couch and let them implode in the background. My lawyer forwarded me a screenshot from a client who'd replied to the restructuring email with a note. We were unaware of internal issues. Glad to hear it's in good hands. Please keep us posted. Another client confirmed a direct deposit to the new account. Slowly, practically, the business was stabilizing under my control. The cleaning crew still showed up at clients' doors, did the work, and left reviews. The difference was invisible to outsiders, but lethal for the people who had been feeding off the illusion. It felt strange. I didn't feel triumphant in the way I thought I would. There was a quiet satisfaction, a justice that was devoid of gloating. But satisfaction wasn't the point anymore. The point was demonstration. The point was that entitlement had consequences even when dressed up as family devotion. A week in, the panic sharpened. An angry call from a vendor who hadn't been paid because funds had been diverted, a client threatening to cancel unless guaranteed refunds were issued, my aunt pleading with neighbors who had once praised her competence. They were clambering on lifelines they hadn't planned for: friends, ex-clients, neighbors, begging for loans or promising to make it right. Their veneer was cracking in slow, ugly fissures. Then, on Friday evening, when I thought maybe the storm would stall in a series of small collapses, my phone buzzed with a single message that made me sit up straight. A forwarded email from my mom to the family group, subject line: urgent. We need to talk tonight. Jude has taken everything. The body was dramatic, full of rhetoric about betrayal and coldness. I read it twice, then 3 times. There was a photo attached, my aunt and Lucas in front of a client's house, smiling, with a caption that accused me of ruining our future. I couldn't help the small, bitter laugh. They'd always been better at staging scenes than at running businesses. I typed one sentence, then deleted it. I could respond with anger, but that would be predictable. Instead, I opened my calendar and booked a family meeting, a neutral space, professionally mediated. I CC'd my lawyer. I wrote a short, neutral message. If you would like to resolve matters professionally, we'll meet Tuesday at 6 p.m. with counsel. Otherwise, continued unauthorized access and transfers will be pursued legally. I hit send. Then I sat back and waited. Almost immediately, the texts flooded again. My cousin's group chat exploded with speculation and accusation. My mother texted, shorter now, stripped of theatrics: please, Jude. Please don't make this worse. Lucas sent a single line that read like a dare and a plea at once: you don't have to do this. I looked at all those words, at the frantic little sentences that tried to weaponize guilt, and for the first time in a long time the guilt didn't stick. I thought about every late-night call I'd answered, every rental check I'd written, every time I'd swallowed an insult and handed over a check. I thought about the slow thefts, the public performances, the way my generosity had been flaunted as their virtue. I turned off my phone and went to the window. In the quiet of my apartment, the city noise muffled. I could almost hear the pieces of a life I'd been building for myself click into place. The revenge had been executed, not with theatrics, but with structure. The satisfaction was not loud. It was the quiet knowledge that I had finally aligned reality with truth. And then my phone buzzed with a different sound, a voicemail from an unknown number. I listened. Mr. Jude, a voice said, steady and formal. This is Officer Mark Davis from the municipal office. We received an anonymous tip this evening regarding potential tax irregularities linked to the cleaning business operating under your family. We're opening an inquiry. Someone asked us to contact you to clarify records. You might want to consult counsel. I stared at the voicemail, heart thudding in a new pattern, not from triumph now, but from a new, colder kind of tension. Someone else had decided to play. Someone had noticed the changes and had the means to complicate them. My lawyer's number was already on my screen. I hit call. The fallout hit faster and harder than I anticipated. Within days of my restructuring, my aunt, Lucas, and even my mom were scrambling to contain the damage I had set in motion, and the consequences were immediate. Clients who had been mismanaged and misrepresented demanded formal apologies, documentation, and in some cases refunds. Their shiny, performative competence evaporated under scrutiny, replaced with fumbling explanations and a growing trail of embarrassment. Emails they had carefully curated to look professional were riddled with contradictions that my lawyer highlighted in polite, clinical language. The first real blow came from the landlord. I had already rerouted rent payments, and now the discrepancy between what had been expected and what had actually been paid became impossible to explain away. The landlord, initially confused, reviewed the documentation I'd prepared and suddenly realized that my aunt and Lucas had no real claim to authority over the account. They were scrambling to produce receipts, but many payments had already been tracked, verified, and redirected. Panic replaced their confidence. My aunt's voice trembled as she begged the landlord for leniency. Lucas tried to charm and argue simultaneously, a combination that only amplified the absurdity of their position. Then came social exposure. Clients started contacting me directly to clarify statements my family had made publicly about business ownership, accomplishments, and responsibilities. Once their lies were corrected, some neighbors and former clients began quietly sharing the truth, backed by official documents, on local business boards and community social media. Word spread that my aunt and Lucas had been benefiting from a structure they didn't actually control. Their credibility, so carefully manufactured over years, was crumbling in real time. I watched it unfold with a strange mixture of detachment and satisfaction. They were desperate, and every attempt to manipulate or guilt me now hit a wall of professionalism and evidence. My mom sent frantic texts asking if I would please intervene or at least show mercy. I didn't reply. She tried calling multiple times, leaving messages that escalated from feigned calmness to emotional pleas. When she finally came to my apartment, she was met with a polite but firm boundary. Any discussion must be through my lawyer. No personal confrontations, no emotional manipulation, no performances. Lucas was the next to crack. He sent a group text to family members outside our immediate circle, trying to spin a story that I had betrayed them out of spite. But with the documentation I had prepared, his story collapsed before it even left the chat. When his lies were challenged by undeniable evidence of past unauthorized transfers and misrepresentations, he was left stammering, trying to justify actions that were indefensible. Friends, neighbors, and even distant relatives started distancing themselves. The mask of the competent, independent cousin dissolved, leaving only embarrassment and panic. My aunt's final attempt at recovery was almost pitiful. She tried to appeal to sentimentality, sending long, tearful letters about family and tradition. But I had learned the hard way that sentimentality is a dangerous weapon when wielded against someone who has already seen the pattern. Her words fell flat. The weight of evidence, of restructuring, of independent verification by clients and vendors outweighed any dramatic appeal. She could cry as much as she liked, but she had forfeited the ability to manipulate me. The municipal inquiry, which I hadn't anticipated when I received that voicemail, ended up being the final nail in the coffin. The official examination revealed mismanaged accounts and inconsistencies that traced directly back to unauthorized withdrawals my aunt and Lucas had initiated over months. They had to account for every transaction they had ever claimed as operational or emergency expenses. The stress was palpable in every phone call and email I received from them. Every attempt to argue, charm, or excuse behavior failed. The investigation didn't require me to act aggressively. I simply provided accurate records. The consequences fell where they belonged. Within a month, the financial and reputational damage had transformed my family's approach entirely. My aunt and Lucas could no longer claim independence or competence. They were forced to apologize formally to clients, repay misappropriated funds, and accept the legal restructuring I had put in place. Even my mother, who had relied on her charm and guilt tactics for years, had to acknowledge that I was no longer the malleable, patient family member they had once controlled. For the first time in years, I felt an unshakable clarity. Boundaries were no longer abstract. They were enforced, and my family had learned, in the most undeniable way, that entitlement has limits. I didn't gloat. I didn't call or text them to show them. I didn't post about it publicly. The satisfaction was quiet but absolute. Their panic, their embarrassment, their inability to manipulate, all unfolded without a single angry word from me. I had built the scenario, executed it professionally, and allowed natural consequences to unfold. Watching them confront the truth of their own entitlement, without me needing to raise my voice, was more powerful than any confrontation could have been. That evening, I sat alone in my apartment, reviewing client feedback and bank statements, making sure everything was finalized. Every piece of evidence, every resolved account, every signed contract reinforced a simple truth. I had reclaimed my autonomy, my work, and my peace. The family who had once laughed at my generosity, mocked my patience, and manipulated my loyalty had been forced to confront the cost of their actions. I finally exhaled. For the first time in years, I felt completely unburdened by guilt, obligation, or fear. The lesson had been taught. The consequences had landed. And for the first time, I realized the full weight of the power I now held. Not just over the business, not just over finances, but over the narrative that had once been theirs to twist. I closed my laptop, poured myself a cup of coffee, and looked out the window at the city lights. The air was still. The work was done. The fallout complete. And in that quiet, victorious moment, I allowed myself a small, private smile. I was finally free.